So welcome to our CCNP ENCORE class. Thank you everyone for being here. Again, I want to thank this class for the great amount of work you're doing. You're really working ahead. I got one person's already up. I think I saw lab 16, a 16 lab being done, which was phenomenal. Blew my mind. So you are more than welcome to work ahead. Don't forget that. Also remember that our due dates are set as just to give you a good path to take. I did change the syllabus in the class a little bit, trying to make it a little clearer in terms of what is I'm asking for. And basically, I just changed it from saying due to assigned on for that syllabus, so that again, I knew it was a little bit unclear when I put due on this day, but everything pretty much is assigned on a date and then due a week later. So right now you're basically working on the 8 through 10 labs, or 8 through 10, and we will be talking. I know we're behind on lecture, but that's just the nature of the beast that we're going to be. All right. So I want to do a couple things today. First off, I want to open up with any questions about the class period. Anything that is causing you problems, anything that's bugging you. Again, here's our weekly attendance forum that you can do each week. Just drop in there and say, I've read chapters 9 and 10, 8 and 10. I'm doing these labs. But once a week on Wednesday, preferably, if you can drop into that weekly attendance discussion and drop a discussion forum item in there. But are there any questions on the class itself as we are going to start today? Anything, you can drop it in chat too if you don't want to come off mute for some reason. Okay, none. All right. Any questions in general you want to ask before we get started? If not, we're going to jump down and talk about MST.
I do have a quick question actually.
Shoot.
So I noticed when I'm doing the labs, I put in the information, I go through the steps, and then they want us to do show commands to better understand it. But some of the stuff is, CCNA level stuff, kind of rudimentary.
Yep.
Are you gonna be upset if we skip one or two of the show commands?
Not if you know it. No. If you know,
Okay.
I mean, if you know what a show IP brief, obviously, just don't worry about that. I would recommend in the later labs, like when you're doing BGP and OSPF, run the command, because they're usually trying to get you to look at a specific thing, like under show IP, OSPF neighbors, maybe a timer or an item they want you to really focus on, because that may be a question on the exam. That would be the only thing I would be careful of, is if it's a command, just pay attention in the lab. They're not trying to call out some little weird part in the show that you wouldn't normally pay attention to.
Because there's one with I guess, for an example, MST as an example. They're like, well, primary, you can lower the priority for the root bridge election,
right?
Or you can set it as primary, secondary, and I'm like,
right.
I kind of already know that, but
yeah, and that's fine. And so don't worry about that. And honestly, cool. The whole I was going to actually open up with this. The whole section on spanning tree. We got a couple chapters on spanning tree. Depending on where you come into the Cisco Academy program at, though, a lot of those could be just review for you, because it used to be back in the day, spanning tree was a huge part of the CCNA. I mean, there were multiple chapters on it, multiple labs. We went over it ad nauseum. Then it was removed. Basically, there was a point at one time when, I guess, I don't know why, but Cisco thought that every single network was going to become a layer 3 network, and spanning tree was no longer necessary. And they ended up with people getting themselves in messes out in their, on the layer 3 ends of their networks, turning off spanning tree or not thinking about spanning tree. And now we're back kind of in the middle. We're in the middle of the CCNA teaches you some about spanning tree, but not a great deal. And we don't really inside of CCNA talk at all about MSTP. So I want to talk about MSTP today. Most of our spanning trees are per VLAN spanning trees. So they are, each individual VLAN will create a spanning tree instance. which in a network with a small number of VLANs, that's perfectly fine. Okay, that's not a big deal. It's not going to cause a large amount of spanning tree traffic. It's not going to cause a lot of spanning tree reconfiguration. We now also know that most of our networks are layer 3, and then only spanning tree and the VLANs are out on the ends or the edges of our networks. So we don't, well, hopefully you don't have very large layer 2 networks that you have to deal with. Now, we used to do it, but we don't anymore. So the idea that you're going to have 400 VLANs and 400 VLANs, each one having their own spanning tree instance, that could definitely become a problem. So to kind of fix that was this multiple spanning tree protocol. And the idea is that you're basically going to take multiple VLANs and map them together into one STP instance. And then that will be a way of reducing the number of STP reconfigurations, the number of STP broadcasts, all of those things, processor use, etc. on the switch. So this is a common spanning tree topology. You'll see an instance here. If you were using a spanning tree instance, if you were using typical spanning tree, you'd actually end up with, if you had 4 VLANs, you would have 4 different spanning trees, one for each VLAN. The per VLAN here again, you'd have one each, so you'd have one for each. You could even have a different root bridge for each one, which would help with the some of the processing that's required on this type of environment. And again, if that's all you had was 4 VLANs, I'm not so sure I'd worry about MST. I think that would probably be, this is probably a bit of overkill. Hold on a second, folks. I'm going to turn the air conditioning down up here. It's a little warm upstairs. But with MST, we can map them all to a, if we want to, okay, we can map them all to a single MST instance. And instead of 3 or 4 spanning tree instances, we would end up with just one spanning tree instance or a region. This region, if we group a set of switches together in a region, the things that have to match in order for them to share MST information is the name of the region, the revision number of the region, and the VLANs in that region for those to actually be in the region together. To non-MST bridges or switches, the MST region will actually appear to be one single switch. And we'll talk about some instances where that can cause some issues for you down the road. MST must have an instance 0, or that what's called the internal spanning tree. It's the first instance. It runs on all switch ports, and it is used to basically carry information across. Other instances are all nested inside of that internal spanning tree, BPDU. So you do have to have the area 0. By default, up to 16 MST instances are supported on a set of switches. Now, here's the good news. It's very easy to configure. Spanning tree mode MST. And then, of course, you can do priority numbers if you want. Either, again, you were talking about this. Who's on the iPhone? You don't have a name for me, so I don't know. Jim, do you not see it? You're not seeing my screen?
That would be this. That would be me. I'm jumping right in right away.
Okay.
Here, I'm home now.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought you could see it. Hold on. How about now?
No. Let me.
Hold on a minute. All right, I was sharing my screen, so let me see if I can get this. All right, Jim, how about now?
This is.
Ron or David? Can y'all see it?
This is Chris.
Okay, Chris.
Okay, I can see it now. Yeah, I can see it.
David, you see it?
I see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Jim, you may want to, drop out and rejoin because I believe it's something on your end. Everybody else can see it. But Chris, just like you were talking about, setting up priority for defining priority, you can do instance priority, or you can do root primary, root secondary. Same values as normal. 4096 increments, unless you do root primary, root secondary. Remember, if you do primary, it goes out, looks at the BPDUs, and then sets it to 4096 below the lowest one that it finds. And don't forget, inside of spanning tree, the lowest wins the root bridge election. So that is just like normal spanning tree. Here we have an instance where spanning tree MST, we have configured 3 different instances, 0, 1, and 2, and made this particular switch root primary for all 3 of those instances. And then we created, under the spanning tree MST configuration command, we named an MST domain and then put a revision number. Now, I need to explain the revision number because the revision number is, it's a weird item. It has to match in order for switches to share MST information. Okay, so in this case, in instance 1, we put VLAN 10 and 20, and in instance 2, we put VLAN 99. So if you want another switch to talk to this switch that we're configuring, switch 1, with MST, the revision number needs to match. The revision number does not automatically increment if you make a change. Okay, it is pretty much just a manual marker for you as an admin to know where you're at in terms of changes you have made on the MST configuration, which does not make much sense, but that's the way MST works. So you could literally go in and make this 4 changes to the instance, leave the revision number the same on all of your switches, and everything would be fine as long as the name, the revision, and the instances and the VLANs associated with those instances match. If though you do change the instance number on one switch, not instance, but if you change the revision number on one switch, you must change it on all your switches for them to continue to participate in MST together. So it is a manual item. It's not like VTP that we'll learn about in a few minutes. This is manual for MST. You then can do show spanning tree MST configuration to see the name of the MST domain, what revision you're on, and what VLANs are mapped to what instance. Okay. And then show spanning tree MST will give you information very similar to just show spanning the PBST or PBST plus, or any of those. It'll tell you who is the bridge, who is, you can delineate from that who is the root, and you can also go on down and see individual port information by doing show spanning tree MST interface, and it will give you the role, status, cost, and so on and so forth. And you'll notice it still has the same port priorities that you see in any other version of spanning tree. So the default is 128 port number. So 128.1, that's because that is port 1. Port 2 should be 128.2. So now, tuning spanning tree, you can change costs if you want to. So if you want to reduce the cost of a particular link for some reason, I would, of course, change the cost on both sides of the link to make sure they match one another. But it is possible. You can also change port priority just like we can in any other spanning tree version by using the port priority. By default, priority is 128, which means if nothing else is changed, by the default usage will be the port with the lowest ID, which will be the lowest number. So that's something that stays the same with our typical spanning tree. Quick question. Has anybody in here actually ever used MST in a production environment? Nobody has used it in a production environment. I can understand that, especially now with layer 3 networks, the way we've got them, because I think like in our building, there's maybe 25 or 30 VLANs at most. So, and they're all contained in the building because of the fact that we convert everything to layer 3 to go down to the core. And that's not that much. It's 30 spanning tree instances is not a huge deal for a modern switch. Okay. Now let's talk about some common misconfigurations within the region. One is the VLAN assignment to the IST, okay? Here we have, by default, instance 0 must be usable and reachable between the two devices. That is because, remember back at the very beginning, I mentioned that all other instance BPDU information is carried in the instance 0 BPDU. We have an example here where we have set up, and on the right, on gig 101 to 101, VLAN 20. So that's an access port, which is connected between the two switches, which is honestly, it's a pretty uncommon configuration anyway. This is probably gonna be a trunk between these, which solves this issue. But since it's an edge case, I expect you to see it on the exam. And then VLAN 10, which is in instance 0, is on gig 102. Well, because of the way spanning tree works, it's going to end up bringing up fully the link gig 101, because that is the lower priority, unless you change something, and port ID. Okay, so it'll be 128.1 versus 128.2. And so it's going to come up, and gig 101 will be fully up, but gig 102 will not, and it actually be blocking on switch 2. So all of the BPDUs that are being carried by instance 0 for the other instances are not getting to switch 2. Okay. So if you want to fix this, you can move VLAN 10 to an MSTI instance other than the internal. Okay. Or just trunk. I mean, let's trunk between the two, okay? And that's what makes the most sense. We should be trunking between our switches anyway. I can't tell you how long it's been since I've seen an access connection between two switches. All right. The other is pruning of VLANs. So if you prune, looking here, you said switch 1 and 2 have been pruned to help with load balancing. But when you do this, you end up pruning out the instance 0 VLAN. And as a result, those BPDUs cannot be sent. So you have to make sure that you do not prune out the VLANs that are on instance 0 and thereby break the ability for the switches to actually send information to one another. All right. Two common, very common problems that we run into. The first one's easy to fix, just trunk. The second one's a little bit more difficult. You need to understand that don't prune the VLAN that's in instance 0, especially if it's the only VLAN in instance 0. You need to make sure that you can have at least one VLAN in instance 0 that is not pruned, so that link stays up and the BPDUs can. You have, Jim? Okay. I'm sure, Jim, it was very large networks. I mean, super large networks. All right. So boundary region is a MSTP area or instance that is connected to a typical spanning tree. More in the DC area, yeah. Yeah, good point. MST is vendor agnostic, so that does work. Yeah. That is a good point. So the common spanning tree at the MST boundary, you do what's called PVST simulation. So basically, MST has the ability to simulate a PVST connection out and then send that information out. So two design implementations consider with integrating MST region with a PVST and RSTP environment. If the MST is not, or excuse me, MST is the root bridge, or if it is not the root bridge for any VLAN. All right. So instance number 1, the MST region is the root bridge, okay, for all VLANs. All region boundaries flood the same IST instance BPDU to all VLANs and the PVST. That makes the instance preferred over other switch, and the MST appears as a single device, and the PVST switches to take place ordered in link, and blocking state. So this is probably what I would say would be the preferred, is make the MST region the root bridge for all of the VLANs in the PBST topology. Then that region itself looks like a root bridge. Okay. If it is not, then the MST switch detects, well, let's go down. If it is not, the MST is not root bridge. The MST region ports can only block or forward to all VLANs. So you can't load balance because IST instance must remain constant, and that switch detects a better BPDU on the boundary. It'll go into BPDU guard and block the port. And that's that PBST simulation check. So what it tries to do, if it's not the root bridge for any VLAN, you can end up in a situation where it will find a better BPDU and put the port into a blocked mode. We really should probably design our networks, if we have them connected, to be the root bridge for all VLANs. I'll tell you this. More than likely, if you got MST, you're going to be running MST across everything, unless for some reason you're bringing in another environment, or you're bringing in two networks together and you're slowly converging to MST. If you're doing that, make the MST region the root bridge for all the VLANs as you're moving over. Okay. Now, one of the things I remember is, as part of this, let me go back here, and this is something I put in here for y'all. I put in here your 1.1 matrix, and you will notice that, let me find it. It's weird. Oh, absolutely. That's the, skip over here. Here, configure and verify spanning tree protocols, MSTP, RSTP. So you'll notice that this is one of those verbs that says configure. So you're going to get questions about actual configuration of the MST. So you need to know how to create the MST instance, create the domain, set the revision, put the VLANs in the correct instances. So, and one of the things, I know you probably all know this, but I'm actually very ashamed of how long it took me to learn this. And it took me to the point where I was writing exams for a vendor to realize how important this first word is in each one of these. So obviously, describe, explain, interpret. That means you're going to look at a configuration and try to interpret what it's doing. And then, of course, configure is your hands-on. So, and then troubleshoot is when you're going to need to know how to look in a config and see if something's broken and why it's broken. Studying via those keywords is a very important thing. So like I said, you're going to need to know how to configure RSPAN. You're going to need to know how to configure AAA authentication on the lines and local users. Configure ACLs and policy policing. All right. So be aware of that. I put this in. This is 1.1. So that's something you can use. I also put in here for you another item that is a learning matrix. That's an Excel spreadsheet that, if you want, you can go in here, and as you're learning things, it tells you kind of where this can be found. It also, if you happen to have the ability to get to it, it'll actually take you out to a, but you'll notice that this spreadsheet that I gave you will actually take you out to a Cisco Live presentation. So that this learning matrix I gave you, I tried to, and it's still valid. Everything seems to be still working. So let's say you want to look more up about, where was that at? That's like Ether channel here. Configure RSTP. I don't think there's anything extra inside of that one. There's no breakout session there. But let's say for whatever reason you wanted to know more about Lisp or VXLANs, you can click here and it will take you out and give you a Cisco live presentation. Okay. So that's a little thing that I found. I don't even remember where I found it. I think I found it on the Cisco Learning website. Yeah, Jim, if you can find that IPD session and post it in our discussion weekly attendance form, that would be great. Because yeah, it is amazing how long. Like I said, I was embarrassed. I've probably been in this field for 15 years before I figured that out. And it took helping write an exam to actually make it happen. So, and again, over here on the side, it does have online references that if you want to look up things. So again, I try to find the one I was looking at VXLANs, but this is a good sheet to download and take home with you. Because again, you can click here and it gives you basically a white paper on VRF commands. So it gives you the white paper that would be found on cisco.com. Okay. So I tried to give that to you inside of the class so that you can use it as a study guide. Plus, if you want, you can always add another column for your own items. So when you find something, you can stick it in there. All right. Any questions on that? That's I think it's a whole DevNet presentation talking about network automation. So see, this is, again, tons of stuff you can look at as additional items for you. Okay. So don't forget that. I put those two at the very top up here. I put your actual matrix of the learning exam objectives, and then the matrix that will help you with all of that. Okay. Now, questions about MST. Let's talk about a little protocol that we used to cover in depth. Quick in chat or come off mute. How many of you have been in the Cisco program for more than 10 years?
Yeah, I have.
You have? Okay. From how many of you been?
Let's put it this way. I've been teaching it. I haven't been in the academy.
Okay. Well, still same difference. You've been working with the CCNA for over 10 years. If you've been working teaching CCNA materials for over 10 to 15 years, it used to be we covered VTP inside the curriculum very well. We actually covered how to configure VTP. We don't really do that anymore, or we just barely touch on it. So this is since 2006. Yeah, that sounds like me, Jim. I realized the other day I've been doing this just Cisco 26 years. Started our Cisco Academy program at Stanley Community College 26 years ago. So it's kind of nuts. Awesome, but also nuts. I also hit 28 years with the state this month. So now I have 28 years working with the state of North Carolina, which is cool. But we're going to talk about VTP, a little bit about DTP. We actually do cover DTP now in the curriculum CCNA a little bit more than we used to. And then either channel bundles, all we're going to hit there is a little bit of troubleshooting stuff. So nothing major there. But VTP, first off, it is a small protocol. It is a proprietary protocol. So it is Cisco proprietary. It is the VLAN trunking protocol. So it's only going to work if you have trunks. Okay, so you got to set up your trunking. You got to have all your trunking working correctly. But then what it lets you do is it lets you set servers into one of four modes. A server, where you can, basically it's a read-write VLAN database. A client, which has a read-only VLAN database. Transparent, which means it has its own read-write database, but it's not part of the VTP domain, but it still forwards the VTP advertisements to other switches. So if for some reason you want a switch to have its own VLAN database, you don't want it to participate in VTP, but it's in your stack of switches and you need VTP information to go through it, you can set it as a transparent. And then off, and that means no VTP advertisements, no VTP at all, okay? So there are three different versions of VTP, 1, 2, and 3. VLAN 1 is, version 1 is the default. And you can have propagation. The problem with versions 1 and 2 is they can only propagate VLANs 1 through 1005 in versions 1 and 2. and version 3 allows 1 to 4094, which is pretty much the max number on most low-end switches. The idea behind this is you can set VTP up, okay? And VTP will allow you to make a VLAN on a single switch, and then that VLAN will propagate to all other switches that are part of the VTP domain. And so you'll see here that communication, it uses a multicast address across trunk links. There are 3 main types of advertisements: a summary, which is every 300 seconds, and that, or when you put a VLAN in, removed or changed, and that's the VTP version, the domain and configuration revision number, and the timestamp. Now, this configuration revision number on VTP does automatically update. So if you add a new VLAN, the number increments, and then that's going to be advertised to all of your other servers and all of your other clients. And then there's a subset after VLAN configuration change takes place. It will only send out the relevant information on those VLANs. And then there can be a client request when it asks for more information about a particular environment. Like a client joins as a lower revision number, it will ask for information to get all of the summary information. Where people got in big trouble with VTP, and it happened, and this is one of the reasons why they put it back in here, and it can be a problem. First off, VTP was on by default, or it's available by default. So people were configuring it in the labs, and they were using the same VTP domain names as their production environments. And then they were making all these changes, and the revision numbers were changing, and they may have a completely different VLAN set up on the servers in their test environment. And then someone, without resetting the switch, connected that switch to the primary network. Yep, exactly. It was a primary. That used to be a CCNA exam question years ago. It can still show up on the CCNP, honestly. And you connect it in, the revision number is higher. All of a sudden, in your entire environment, everything running VTP takes the information from that test switch, and all your VLANs are gone, and your entire VLAN environment is different. That's a bad day. Okay, that's a very bad day. So we need to realize that if you don't want that to happen to yourself, the best thing to do is to remove VTP from any switch that you're going to join to your domain, clear it out, and reboot it. All right, that's the best thing. Okay, and if you also change the domain name, it can set the local switch version back to 0. So you could have connected it to your network by doing VTP domain. Let's say your domain was Acme. If you change it to Cisco and then change it back to Acme, it would have went to 0. I wouldn't take a chance. I would just get rid of it. Okay, that's me. All right. But here we have VTP version 1, 2, or 3. You set that in global config. Define the domain. Define your role. By default, you are a server. That is the default role when you enable VTP. You are put a VTP domain name in. You are a server, and then you can put an optional VTP password. And then what that is used for is, yeah, it is definitely rock solid if you do it right. And it's super helpful because, again, you don't have to go to every single switch to make a change to a VLAN. You make it on one server, and it propagates down through all your other switches that are part of the domain. I do highly recommend a VTP password that is used to make sure that the clients are talk to each other. It doesn't encrypt any of the information, but it is used to make sure they're allowed to talk to each other. Here's an example: VTP domain Cisco Press, VTP version 3, VTP mode server, VTP password, and then you can do exit VTP primary, and that would make this the primary server. And then you go down and you look at your other switches that you configure. You would decide whether or not you want them to be clients or servers. Now, I recommend having at least 2 server switches in your environment. It's easy enough to change a client to a server just by doing VTP mode, but I would have more than one so that you could have a some backup in case something happened. I've kind of racked my brain trying to figure out an actual use case for when I would use transparent. Jim, do you have one? Because I can't really think of one where, unless I just can't, I can't visualize why I would want a switch to be transparent.
From my experience, it would be a switch that you want to have the same core set of VLAN configured, you know, but you don't want it to update. So if you've got in one environment I worked in, we had, you know, you have a stable set of VLANs that never change.
Okay.
But then we had other VLANs that would be created and be destroyed based on, you know, whatever we happen to be doing.
Okay.
And that's, so we would make a single switch transparent. It has the core VLANs and nothing else. And as long as it's in the same, it has the same domain name, it'll pass along the VTP advertisements to other, you know, client and server switches beyond itself. So everybody gets the updates. That's an example of where you might
Okay.
get the
And
transparent switch.
that makes sense. And I think about it then, maybe in an environment where you had like a switch that serviced an area in your environment that was like almost like offices, and the others were lab environments, or environments where the VLANs were changed on a constant basis. But these set of 8 VLANs were all this switch ever had to service. You could do it that way. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Like
if you're doing some kind of it works really well in a classroom environment because especially if you don't have centralized virtualization.
Right.
So, you know, I've got VirtualBox or VMware Workstation or what KVM, whatever on the student machines, and those extra NICs have got to be in a certain place, and you know, but your switches that are supporting the core infrastructure stuff don't need to be messing around with adding and deleting all those VLANs.
That makes sense. That does make sense. Okay. That it just like Jim said, as long as you give it the domain name and it's the right version and the password is the same, then it will pass through any BTP advertisements. So you don't have to worry about that. I'm fairly certain, I may be wrong because it's been a while since I've played with BTP, but I'm fairly certain this is one of the few protocols that when you set a password, you can actually do like a show VTP password, and it will show you the exact password that is set. I think I remember that. I'm fairly certain that is correct. I'm gonna check in Packet Tracer, but I think that is correct. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull over here, and I'm actually gonna make this, just do this real quick. VTP. So en config t host s1, and then we'll do VTP domain Cisco Press. Remember, it is case sensitive, so if you had other switches in here, you'd have to make sure you made it Cisco Press. VT mode server, VTP version 3. I must not support it. It doesn't support 3 in here. Okay, that's fine. That's Packet Tracer for you. VTP password. I'm gonna use Cisco. I bet it won't take the primary command either. Nope, it won't do it on this one. Okay, so let's do a do show VTP password. Yeah, this is one of the, and the reason I remember that is because I used to make students do VTP in the National Skills USA contest, and I had them set a password, and we could use the command show VTP password to see if they said it correctly. That's the only reason I remember that. Now, speaking of which, I'm glad I thought about this. I meant to tell you at the very beginning, but I had forgotten. Next week is the National Skills USA contest. It is it's in Atlanta. My entire team is are our judges for the internetworking contest. So our entire team will be heading out on Sunday down there. We will not have class meeting next Wednesday. There's no way I can run it, and we'll be running contestants through the test on Wednesday and Thursday. We go in and set an entire setup up on Monday and Tuesday. Then Wednesday, Thursday, we do our competition, and then we tear it down Thursday night, throw it all back in vans, and drive back home. So I will not be able to have a class meeting next week. I apologize, but it's just, there's no way I can have it and do what we do down there, because that's a heck of a job. If you, by the way, are not doing Skills USA, and you are a school, you need to be doing it. Check into it at the state level. It is a really great thing. The Internetworking Contest is based off of the CCNA curriculum, and it's something that can really help your students. So here we go, verifying it, show BTP status. It'll tell you what versions are there. It will show, let me pull this back up and we'll do it on this, see what this thing does. So let's do a do show BTP status. Shows you what it supports, shows you the domain name, shows you what type of mode it is, and also show you the number of VLANs in the configuration registry. Now I go in here and create a new VLAN. Let's do VLAN 10, name, Bubba. Okay, and then do a do show BTP status. We should get a revision number. Okay, we had two changes. We had a VLAN added and a name change. So the configuration registry changes. And this is the MD5 digest that comes from the password being set. That's another way you can pretty much know that a password's been set, because the digest is there. Okay. Here's showing the client being in client mode. Okay, operating mode, configuration revision. And then again, name PCs, put them in, and you'll notice configuration revision changes. That is different than MST. So this is used by the servers to keep up with who has the most relevant and up-to-date copy of the VLAN database. Again, if you don't reset that number and you put it into an environment where it becomes the BTP server, it can be catastrophic. Okay, because if you had removed all the VLANs in the network as part of a test, all the VLANs in your network would disappear. Okay, let's say within BTP3, I'm sorry, Jim's saying here, you can add the hidden parameter to BTP password. Okay, good. Okay, that's good. That's very good, because that is I think a pretty big security hole. Not a massive security hole, but it seems like it's a decent sized security hole that you can just do show BTP password. Let me jump over here real quick. I'll try something more. I don't know, why did that not do what I wanted? Didn't. Showing you all my models I'm printing. See if I can get second. It's not good. Give me just a second. Pull one over. And my computer is acting weird. All right. I'm gonna get something started over here while we're doing this. Okay. While I'm doing this and then talk to you, have any of you had any issues with the switches or anything in the pods? Any major issues? Don't forget to do erase the switches when you boot, when you go in. I usually, they're supposed to erase themselves and be clear, but I still suggest that you do a delete the VLAN.dat and do an erase, start and reload of each switch before you start your own lab.
I noticed that doesn't seem to be erasing the VLAN.dat. So
yeah, for some reason.
Yeah, so like the lab for VTP, if you want to start at 0, you have to reinitialize it yourself.
Yep. So I strongly suggest you do that on each one of the switches. We played with that. We thought we had it fixed, but at this point we're just suggesting do manual. Okay. Any questions about BTP? It's a simple little protocol. It is proprietary, but it's a super neat protocol to use in the real world because it makes your life a whole lot easier in terms of VLAN configuration. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on DTP. Are there any questions? DTP obviously is dynamic trunking protocol. I consider it a massive security hole. You know, it is one of those things, if you don't turn it off, a hacker can connect a machine that is running a spoof version of DTP to make itself look like a switch to your network, create a trunk link to their device, and start seeing all the broadcast traffic on every VLAN. Now, of course, you should have all the ports set to access and no negotiate, and you should also have port security on those ports that you're worried about someone connecting to. But I don't like DTP. I also don't like the idea of dynamic trunking because if I'm going to trunk, I want to set the trunks up myself. That's just me. And so you know, it's one of those things that I think is important. You do need to know the modes though. Dynamic desirable basically is I will become a trunk if you want to become a trunk, and I want to become a trunk. Dynamic auto is I will become a trunk, but only if you tell me to become a trunk. I kind of compare it like this. Dynamic auto is when, you know, you say to your significant other, hey, let's go out to eat. And then they go, where do you want to go? And you go, I don't know, where do you want to go? I don't know where you want to go. Because both of them would agree to go just about anywhere, but somebody's got to make a decision. With dynamic desirable, someone says, let's go eat Mexican. And then the other person says, okay. So, but dynamic desirable, the ports are wanting to become a switch and they switch trunk, and they advertise that in the negotiation process. Notice if one side set to trunk, one side is set to dynamic desirable, you will have a trunk. If it's set to dynamic auto, you will have a trunk. I personally just like doing switch port mode trunk. And then I know it's a trunk and I don't have to worry about it. How can you turn off DTP? What's the command? Anybody remember?
No negotiate.
No negotiate. Turn it into an access port. So you do a switch port mode access, and then you do switch port, no negotiate. And that turns off DTP. Okay. So here's an example of setting up auto on one side, desirable on the other. A common troubleshooting thing you could see on the exam on this is both sides set to auto, and then they're not going to create a trunk because both sides are basically waiting to say, hey, who's going to be a trunk? I don't know. You want to be a trunk? No, I want to be a trunk. I don't want to be a trunk, etc. So it's a common issue that we see inside of DTP. Can you see how this is a possible security hole and a problem? Let's see, we got 1010. All right, hold on one second. I'm making a trunk here between a couple switches. I pulled up a lab, y'all. I want to see, we're going to see if these support BTP version. Yeah, okay. So yep. Yeah, it was a big problem on older switches. You're right, Jim. Because they really did. Some of them were dynamic desirable by default, and you could end up with a real mess. set this version 3. So I'm gonna make this the server. Yep. And let's make this BTP mode client. Okay. Let's do BTP password. So we'll do BTP password class, and then I'll do the same over here. Okay, so I want to see. So what was that command? What was the command? It was BTP password. Or did you have to do it after you set the password? Was it? Ah, there it is, hidden. Okay. Okay, there we go. So now I should not be able to do. Yep, there we go. That's good. Excellent. Thanks, Jim. Taught me something. I did not know about that one. So if you don't want them to be able to see that in by doing the show BTP password, you also can set the, you know what? I'm going to try something. Well, that can't be. If you did secret, it'd probably be type 5. Let's do that. Let's do BTP password class secret. Ah, okay. So in order to do that, you gotta have a 32 character one. Wow. Okay. We'll leave it just hidden.
I seem to recall that what they're asking for there is the encrypted string versus a plain
Right.
text string. So,
Oh,
and right.
okay.
So they're looking for the encrypted string, which is kind of weird,
That is
but
weird.
that's, whatever. In 32 character result there, I have no idea what that is. That's not MD5.
No, that's not. That's what I was thinking.
I don't know what it is.
Let's try class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, I'm still not long enough. Wow. That's gotta be getting fairly close. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you're way over.
Yeah, I'm way over. Yeah, I mean,
Way over
I
32
don't know
now.
what that is. Then I'm like you. I don't understand what they're asking. But either way, I like the fact you can hide it. I mean, that's good because do show BTP password and it's show run. I don't think there's anything about BTP even inside the configuration though. So yeah, there's nothing in the config about BTP, so you don't really have to worry about that being shown. But the cool news is this: so you'll see that I've created BTP. We're running it. We got a server there. There are no existing VLANs or new ones. VLAN 10 name. Oh, I got to do primary. BTP primary. Oop, not pruning. BTP primary.
That's a privileged exec command.
Oh. Ah, okay. Huh. It's not taking a password. Like I've lost access to the switch. There it went. There it went. There it goes. All right. So now, if I could type at all, VLAN 10 name class room VLAN 20 name faculty. All right. Type exit, and we should be able to go over to switch 2 and see those same do show VLAN. And there they are. So this is a do show BTP status. And you can see this is a client, and you can see the revision number, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of cool. This one's still got the password set where you can see it though. So, but that's just a little quick thing showing VTP. By the way, if you are teaching CCNA, you can take lab 346, and this is a really good lab on CCNA 3. Actually CCNA 2. This is a good little lab to throw in VTP into if you want to teach it. So lab 346, it's set up. You're doing trunks between these anyway. You're configuring VLANs anyway. Just at the end, have them install and configure VTP and add a couple extra VLANs. So that's a good one to use if you want to try that. All right. So last thing we're going to talk about is Ether channel. The big thing here is I think all of us are fairly familiar with LACP and PageP. Remember that in CCNA, LACP is the only thing they're asking you to configure. You're going to need to know how to configure PageP as part of the CCNP. The thing that we don't talk about inside of LACP in CCNA is basically the fast mode. So we go down here and usually find that page. LACP fast. Typically with LACP, you send out basically a hello or an alive packet every 30 seconds, and after 90 seconds, the LACP, that particular interface will be considered not available in LACP. Well, in many environments, that's not fast enough. So they actually have a thing called LACP fast, and so it sends an advertisement every 1 second, and it will remove it if it's not available after 3 seconds. Be careful with this because it does create a huge amount of LACP traffic, but there are environments that you may want this, like in a data center, super high-speed data center environments where you can't afford to wait 90 seconds for a particular link to be down. If you do set this, you need to set it on both sides. Otherwise, you're going to have a mess because one side's going to think it's doing LACP slow, one side thinks it's doing LACP fast. Don't do that, okay? Make sure both sides are set to LACP fast. This is not something we have seen in the past, so I wanted to mention that to you. The other thing you can do too is set minimum links, min links, okay? And then of course you can do a max length bundle too. Typically, remember, still same thing. It's got to have the same mode. It's got to have the same, if it's a trunk, it's got to have the same native VLANs. It's got to have the same VLANs on it allowed. All of those things are still the same with LACP. It's not anything any different. The one thing that we do not also talk about, and here's a priority, where you can make a particular port or switch, the master switch for the port channel. Okay, again, that's not necessarily a command we've used before, but that's not a big thing to understand there. But one of the things I do want you to realize is there is and will probably be some type of question about the type of load balancing that is used on LACP. Phone's digging at me. And the default LACP load balancing protocol is source MAC. Let's see, it is, let's see, trying to figure it is source MAC. So of all the options here, you've got destination IP, destination MAC. The default is typically source MAC address. It's how it's going to be hashed across those. It's also important to realize that the way this tries to do it is it tries to do traffic flows across it. It's not forward out member links and round robin. It's a hash that's calculated, and that hash is based upon the fields that are in this load balancing option. And so it would do it based upon destination MAC. That's why you can end up with, if you put uneven number of links on a port channel, a link may not even end up getting used. So that's why you need to keep it consistently in powers of 2. You may think, well, I'll put 3 links in the port channel. That way I've got a bonus one. Well, that one's probably not even going to be used as part of the algorithm. The other thing I try to do, and this is something that's getting real deep in the weeds, but on your switches, each bank of ports on a switch are usually controlled by a different ASIC. All right, so you can actually dig down in the documentation on your switch and find that, say, ports 1 through 8 are on a particular part of the control board on the switch. Ports 9 through 12 are on another port. So what I try to do when I'm building LACP and page speed channels is I use port 1 and port 5 or port 9. So that way, two things can happen. One, if one of the ASICs fails on the switch, I may lose all the first 9 ports or first 8 ports, but maybe the ASIC for the second 9 ports or 8 ports won't fail, so port 9 would stay up. So there's some logic behind that. Also, it keeps that one ASIC from being overwhelmed by doing all the traffic on that one bank of ports. I don't know if it makes a really big difference or not. It's just something I try to do in the real world. Have any of you done that before, or do you just typically pick the first 2 ports that are closest to each other? It's something I read about years ago. Thorne, have you ever done that, or anybody ever done it? Never done it, Jim? Yeah. I did it in our data center. I looked up on the Dell switches. We have Dell switches in our data center. And I looked up the controlling ASICs and how the board was built on the back end, and split the ether channels, the LACP channels, across 2 different sets of ports that are on different ASICs. It may not make any difference at all, but it just gave me some warm fuzzies to feel like I could have one set fail and possibly continue to have everything up and running. Okay. All right, everybody, don't forget on these PowerPoints that I'm giving you for the chapters, at the end, there's a really good command reference for each one of the chapters. So, don't bypass these PowerPoints, download them to your local system and take a look at them, because you'll see that we have a really good set of command indexes that you can look at here. All right. Okay, everybody, I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions? Please do not forget, no class next week. I'll be gone. I apologize. Keep working. Make sure you do on Wednesday, if you can, do your weekly attendance discussion forum, and send me emails. I will be responding to emails, but it's probably going to take me a little bit longer to respond than normal, because during the day we'll either be set during Monday, Tuesday. I can probably respond on my phone fairly quickly. Wednesday, Thursday, when we have contestants going on, it's a lot of times I don't have time, especially when we're grading. So